Hi, welcome to Actualol. I'm Jon Purkis. These are the board games I've been playing lately. I'm actually going to start off with a book. This is called It's All a Game, A Short History of Board Games. And I've been reading this lately and I just really wanted to share it with everyone because I really enjoyed it. It is talking really a lot about the history of board games, but coming up to modern day. And I've found that I just learnt loads from it. And I think if you're into board games and you like reading, I think that you find this quite fascinating. So I'm just going to remind myself some of the things that I learned from the chapters. So it starts with ancient board games, so talking about Senet from ancient Egypt. And one of the things I found fascinating about that was that there was a board game that they found that had been played for 3,000 years. If you can imagine the same game played across like civilization spanning that time. I just found that amazing. I really hope that Monopoly doesn't stick around that long. And then they're talking about chess and how that evolved. And I found it fascinating to learn that drafts actually came after chess. It was like a simplification of chess, which is interesting because if you imagine these days, you've got all these dice games or card game simplifications of bigger board games. I suppose drafts is that to chess. Then they were talking about a chapter on backgammon, and I found that fascinating because I didn't really know that backgammon was a really popular, almost sport game in the way that poker is now in the 70s, and you would get these big international tournaments where celebrities would turn up and huge amounts of money were bet on it. And there's a really interesting bit that I highlighted in the book because it was talking about how as more money got into the game in backgammon in these tournaments, professional players started to play it. So it wasn't just kind of playboys that enjoyed the sport and they had loads of money to gamble. People that were really good at it started to play it because obviously they can make a lot of money from it. What happened though is that they took it so seriously and they would take ages on their turn that it took all of the fun out of it, and then people no longer wanted to watch it as a sport, and basically the tournament scene kind of died off, or all the big money and all the celebrities around it died off. And that just made me think of analysis paralysis, and where people can take games a little too seriously and it kind of sucks the joy out for the other players. And it seemed like that happened in the world of international backgammon tournaments. Then they talk about Monopoly, which is more of a famous story that you might have heard of. Of course, originally it was designed by a woman back in like the 1920s, I think. It was supposed to be teaching people how being a landlord is bad and how the world is set up in this capitalist society so that a few people get very rich and everyone else gets poor. And it was trying to instill a certain economic sort of ideal to people, and that just didn't happen at all. And actually what happened was that the game didn't pick up for a good sort of 10 years. It changed a little bit, but eventually when it really got popular, it was popular because of that capitalist idea that it was pushing, and people enjoyed that about it. They didn't actually really learn the lesson that the game was originally trying to teach. One of the things that was fascinating to learn about a lot of these games is that they were made by just one person who was sort of down on their luck, maybe looking for some fortune. There's a lot of mentions to the Great Depression, and often it's very sad stories because the game wasn't necessarily successful for them, or they sold it and didn't actually make as much money as they would have. And I think it's just really fascinating to me to hear the personal story behind these designers, because you sort of look at game designers today and often they're doing it as a side thing. But the way it's painted in this book for a lot of these people is it was a really kind of a last-ditch attempt, or it really had an impact. And some of them get very rich and others it's a more heartbreaking tale. There's a really interesting story about a father who taught his 3 daughters how to play chess from a really young age, and how they just turned into chess grandmasters, and how you really can, if you want to make someone really good at board games, then that guy proved that it's possible. So towards the end of the book, they talk about more modern stuff, and the author has interviewed Matt Leacock, and he talks about what inspired him to make Pandemic. And then there's reference to Twilight Struggle, Catan, obviously the rise of German board games and the kind of history behind that. So later on, it talks about the stuff that I kind of already knew about, but giving more details. There's certainly things that I learned about this era that we're in since the sort of 80s and 90s. And there were still fascinating bits in there, but I found it especially fascinating to learn about the games that came before and how they came about. And often there was very strong reasons why they existed. They came about at a certain part of time. And something like Trivial Pursuit, for example, came in the 80s at a point when people thought the games were for kids. And Trivial Pursuit was really marketed as an adult game, and it had a really high price point, and yet it blew up. It changed board games forever because it said to people, look, you can put a high price tag on it, you can make a game that is solely for adults, and it can sell and sell. And I think that Trivial Pursuit is kind of a terrible game, but it's really nice to look back and learn kind of what it did for us. So yeah, I think it's really nicely written with loads of interesting anecdotes that I was kind of reading and then immediately kind of telling to my girlfriend because I found it so fascinating. So I'd highly recommend checking out It's All a Game, and the author is Tristan Donovan. I want to talk about two games now that are quite similar. They are Through the Desert and Blue Lagoon. They're both designed from the great designer Reiner Knizia. But Through the Desert is from the 90s. This is a more recent version from Z-Man Games. Blue Lagoon came out for the first time last year in 2018. They have some similar mechanisms, and that's why I wanted to talk about them at the same time. So I'm going to start with Through the Desert. So they're really these path building games, and the thing that I love about them is that they're a little bit mean. There's a fair amount of blocking in the game. They are abstract. Largely, Through the Desert is about building camel caravans. So you're placing down these camels onto the board to connect up to your caravans that have been started by these camel leaders. I'm trying to connect up to oases to get 5 points. Then if I place a caravan, if I place a camel that basically connects me to a watering hole, I take that tile and they're worth 1, 2, or 3 points. You also get points at the end of the game for having the longest caravan in a specific color. One of the things I love about it is that you'll just inch closer to things, but you'll know. Let's say I'm right next to this 2 watering hole here, and nobody else is nearby for now. I know that is mine, and so I don't need to take it. I could take my turn and I could place a camel there, and I've got this token. But I don't need to rush and do that. I need to worry about what other things I can get closer to first, or what plans am I trying for. So you have to keep your eye out for all these different things that you want to get, but you're not going to take them right now because it's not the best time to do that. But make sure you do keep an eye on it, because if somebody inches closer on their turn, now if somebody then went here on their turn, all I have to do is then take it. I'm right next to it. I've got it. But if I forget to do that on my turn, or I don't spot it, then of course they've got it. So there is a lot of keeping track of everything that's going on, and that's why really it's this abstract game of trying to see where the best move is. It's so simple in terms of the turn that you take. You just place 2 camels, and the way you get points is simple too, but there is loads to think about, and I love how interactive it is. You can really get frustrated with other players. It definitely pays to be blocking people off and stopping them from doing what they want to do. But if you can also do that whilst also getting points yourself, then even better. I think it's a wonderful game. And then I played Blue Lagoon, and I'm really just trying to work out which is my favorite between them. So let's get Blue Lagoon open. In Blue Lagoon, you are competing to settle these islands, and there's a pretty heavy Moana theme with the artwork. So what you're doing is you're taking it in turns to place down one of these little chips that represents one of your people, and it plays over 2 different rounds where the board kind of resets in between. So in the first round, you are turning up in your boats, so you're going to be spreading out across these islands, and there are a number of different ways to get points in this one. You can move on to a resource to pick it up, and you are collecting these resources either in sets of themselves or a set of one of each of 4 types of resource. then you're just trying to control areas. And what you're trying to do is to either have the most on an island, and they all have points, so you've got 10 for a big island, 8 and 6 points. You're trying to have the most tokens on there at the end of the round. You're also trying to just be on every island, so you get points if you're on 7 out of the 8 islands, or 8. That's quite hard to pull off. Then the really tricky one is trying to create a path that connects up loads of islands. So this pink player here has connected up 1, 2, and then 3 islands here. And if they could continue to move around the board, then they could collect. They could get a lot of points like that. But everyone can see what they're trying to do with that, and they can just quite easily block them off, stop them from getting across. And creating this path here in itself is just really blocking off the other players either side, because now they can't get through this massive island in the middle. It feels a lot like Through the Desert, because you are just taking it in turns to do one thing, place down one of these, and you're creating these pathways, and you are blocking off the other players. There's definitely this mean competitiveness to it that I really enjoy. There's so much to think about on your turn, and yet it's so simple in the rules. You just place a piece on the board. And that's one thing I slightly prefer about Blue Lagoon, is just that on your turn you place one thing. In Through the Desert you place 2 things, and so that just raises the potential AP by 100%. And I think these games do have the potential to cause analysis paralysis in players, because there's a lot of things to consider and it's competitive. But that's why the game's so good. And every decision you make will have an impact on your success. It isn't one of those games where you sort of do a load of meaningless things and then a few big decisions. No, everything will count in this. What I like about Blue Lagoon is just that it's got more colourful artwork. It's just a bit brighter. It's also a smaller box. I think that Through the Desert, I quite like the theme of, but the board and the watering holes, just a kind of drab. I think it would have benefited more from a Days of Wonder kind of cartoony feel that Blue Lagoon is definitely much closer to. What's interesting though in Blue Lagoon is as you ramp up to the end of that first round, you are having to worry about where to place these huts. They are the only thing that's going to stay on the board for the second round. So all the tokens will come off, all of the resources will get put back on in a random order, and these huts will stay, and from then on you are placing your tokens adjacent to the huts. So you need to make sure that you've spread out some huts in some nice places for that second round, or it's really going to cost you. Really, I love both games, but I'm not sure I personally want to keep both. And so for me, I'm just leaning towards Blue Lagoon because I just think it's going to be more appealing to a newcomer. I think they're both great games for newbies, and I would highly recommend both of them. So that is Blue Lagoon and Through the Desert. Kickass is a cooperative game based on the comic book of the same name, and there's also films about it. And it's about a teenager and sort of a band of plucky, terrible superheroes that don't have any superpowers. They're just effectively vigilantes that dress up in suits. It's a cooperative game where you all take on the role of one of the main characters in the story. So there's a bunch of different characters you can be. Here you've got Kickass and Hit Girl, and those boards will be tracking certain aspects of your character. And then you've got bad things happening in New York, and there are these various bad guys that are coming to terrorize different neighborhoods. You have to go and fight them off, and there's also these plot events that will be doing bad things, and you are trying to deal with those, or otherwise they have a really negative effect. What you're trying to do is complete 3 events, and then the boss will be revealed. Then you've got to defeat the boss, and that's how you win the game. Of course, you're trying to survive as you go, and the way you lose the game is if City Hall, this section in the center, is overrun by bad guys, then you've lost. And the way it works is that they will spawn every turn, and they get placed on these different locations. But if a location is filled up, you will follow the arrows, and as more and more fill up, they're just going to ending up in City Hall. And I've found that it happens very quickly, surprisingly quickly. So some of the cool things about the game is you've got your character here, and you're tracking your happiness And generally, when you fight bad guys, that makes you unhappy. You don't really want to be doing it, and it's probably hurting you. So that will bring down your happiness. If you get too unhappy, you will reveal these hardships. So you've got these 2 hardship cards. And I think this is a fascinating mechanism because you don't know what your hardships are going to be until you get unhappy, and they will get revealed. So for example, this one is that you have a gambling problem, so you're going to lose money. This one is depression, so every night phase you're going to get even more unhappy. I really like the thematic touches of those. There's just something really nice about the way they work, and if you get happy again, they get covered up again, so they're no longer affecting you. And I just think that perfectly fits with life, and things get bad and your sort of depression reactivates itself, and then things go good again and you kind of can deal with it easier. You've also got your strength, so you can go and work out in Central Park. That will improve your strength, which generally means you can roll more dice. Then you've got your social media success. So depending on how many likes you have on social media will have an effect on things. So if you get famous, the shop where you buy items suddenly becomes cheaper because people like you. So the way you take actions in the game is with a hand of action cards. It's really simple, and I really like how simple the system is. You basically have 5 cards you can pick from. Some will refer more to kind of moving around and activating locations. Others are focused on combat, and that's these red cards. Here, these are the basic cards you would start with. This time icon here just relates to doing an action in the location. So every location has an action. So for example, if you go to Wall Street, you can spend some time. It makes you unhappy, but you make a bunch of money. That makes sense. You go to Central Park, you can spend some time, you can be happy in the park, or you can work out and get stronger. Combat is fairly straightforward. You've got red dice that you roll depending on how many items and how strong you are. You'll roll that, you're looking for hits, but you also have to roll the blue dice, which is protecting you. Generally, it's quite easy to get hurt when you're fighting, which makes sense because you're not a proper superhero, you're just a guy. The thing that I really found with combat is that it is harsh. There isn't much to change the fact that you are just rolling dice, and the dice are brutal. They have a 50-50 chance of getting a hit. I like cooperative games that are close, that you play it the first time and you feel like, yeah, we can come back and we can beat it. And the first time I played it, we got to sort of round 4 out of 9 and we were done. And then the second time I played it, I thought, yeah, I've learned from this. We are going to improve, we're going to build up. And no, we got destroyed in like round 4 or 5. So I think there's some really cool things here. I think if you absolutely love the comic books or the films, I think there's probably a game that you could really get used to, really understand. I think there's lovely thematic touches, and it's a solid game in terms of the way things work. It doesn't overcomplicate stuff, but I want a cooperative game that you can enjoy from that first play. So I can recommend it if you love it. If you like punishing cooperative games, I'm talking really punishing, then check out Kickass, but it wasn't quite for me. Escape Tales: The Awakening is an escape room style game that I've been excited about for a long time. Came out at Essen. The idea with this is that you're a father whose wife died 5 years ago, and your daughter is in a coma, and you try to perform this ritual of awakening to get her out of this coma, and you end up in this sort of weird world where you're having to solve puzzles to get through it and to try and get her back. I think the bulk of a game like this all comes down to the puzzles, and I'm certainly not going to be spoiling any of them for you. And I would say on that level, this game totally succeeds. If you like escape room games and you want a game with interesting, original, fresh puzzles and loads of them, then absolutely get this game. And we had a blast trying to solve some of these puzzles. There was definitely a lot of them at that perfect level of like, yeah, I had to put loads of thought into that. And now at the end of it, I feel great because we solved it. We really worked as a team, and it just has exactly what you want from an escape room game. The way you solve puzzles is actually using an app, except what I liked about it is that you're just accessing a website. You're not having to download anything. And then the website will track which puzzles you've done. And another thing I really liked about it was that when you had a puzzle, you could click to see how many cards were required. It's such a small little touch, but in something like Unlock, you'll be like, oh my God, I think, why can't we solve this? And then literally it's because you were supposed to do something else first and you needed another card and you had no idea and you're spending 10 minutes thinking you've got everything to solve it. And in Escape Tales, you can just check and it'll say, you need 4 cards to solve this and you've only got 2. So you realize, oh, okay, we can't solve this right now. Let's focus on other things. I love that. That's just, you don't have to even click on it. You don't have to reveal that if you want to sort of keep it a secret, but I like that it's an option. My experience with the storybook was that it was nicely written, but I didn't massively buy into it. I didn't feel like it was adding a whole lot to the experience. It was slowing things down because you're having to read stuff, but I actually found that the story didn't massively work for me. I'm not sure if that's because of the specific story that it was. I'm inclined to think that it might just be that you can't necessarily tack on a story that easily to an escape room game, because when it comes down to it, these puzzles, whilst different, are still similar to other escape room games, and you can't just intrinsically link a story to those things. You have to jump out of the story, oh, I'm trying to save my daughter, to then doing like a maths problem or a color matching thing. And there's no way to connect that. The idea of this being like a ritual that you're trying to perform and you're trapped in this netherworld, and it's like, yeah, it might be the closest that you can come, but it didn't really do that much for us. And the other thing that we found with it was just that it was dark, and not in a sort of like refreshing, oh, you know, this war of mine type of way. It was just sort of like dwelling on this idea that not only has your wife died, but your daughter is in a coma, maybe dying, and there's all sorts of references to hospital beds and things like that, and you sort of think, well, if somebody had actually been through this, that might be really kind of triggering for them. And even if it wasn't, I wouldn't say it triggered anything in me. I just found it kind of bleak, and there just wasn't anything very exciting about it. I don't want to come across as overly critical, because I think escape room games, whether they succeed or fail, is down to the puzzles. And the puzzles in this game are great. And if you like escape room games and you want to play another one with interesting puzzles, absolutely play Escape Tales: The Awakening. My reaction to certain aspects of the game didn't stop me from enjoying those puzzles, and really that's what it's all about. That is Escape Tales: The Awakening. Tag City is an interesting roll and write game that I picked up at Essen. The way this one works is you are graffiti artists, you're trying to tag up the city, and you're racing to complete things. It's got an interesting I split you choose mechanism in it that I've never seen in another roll and write game. Basically, the first player will roll these dice, and then they will assign them. So you've got this, this is like a communal board that has these different Tetra shapes on. And so, for example, if I've got a 6 here, I can assign it to either this shape or this shape. And so I can decide, oh, let's say I put this one here, and I put this one here, and let's say this is a 3, I go here and here. So I have made these shapes available to the other players, so they are looking at their city board and they are deciding what they want to fill in. I get to pick last, just like any I split you choose game. So somebody will take a dice and they will draw down that shape, take a dice, draw that shape. When it comes to me, there'll be 2 left, so I will get a bit of a choice. And so maybe I take this shape and I draw it somewhere on my board. So the last piece everybody gets, so we all share that, goes on their board. So the boards fill up pretty quick. And what I'm trying to do is to complete regions to get points, to complete rows and columns. So these different regions, depending on the size, they're worth different points. So the first person to finish off blue is going to get 14 points. Then anyone else that is able to finish blue, not just the second player, will get 7 points. You can see other people's boards, you know what they want, you know that they're also going for your regions, so you can try and stop them maybe by not giving them the shapes that they need. You get 5 points for completing a row if you do it first, 3 points for completing a column if you do that first, and you're just racing to do all this stuff and do things in the most efficient way. And so it's fascinating. Some of these pieces are will take up more spaces on the board. So this one is 5 spaces, whereas others are only 4. So you're going to fill up a lot more of your board if you use those bigger pieces, but they might be harder to fit into everything. So there's that. What I have found with the ice split you choose is that often you will just try and put the dice on the things that you want and just hope that they come back round to you. I haven't too many times worried about as much what the other people are doing, but often, especially in a smaller player count, you might be going for a different region to them, so there isn't necessarily that direct competition. But I do like the fact that you're all having to think about the same thing. There is a sort of interaction in terms of what's available. But I also do think that it does slow it down a bit. There are lots of roll and write games where you're drafting dice, and this is a bit similar to that. I like that you are deciding what's available, but making that decision about what to take will slow it down because you're not all using the same results and turns aren't whipping around like that. And I found that it's one of those roll and write games where you're racing to get stuff. You're not being so much punished. It doesn't have as much push or luck to it as something like Avenue or Quinto. It's very reminiscent of a game called Knock Mal, but I much prefer this one. And this one has an advanced board on the other side where the regions of the cities are more interesting shapes. So I think that's really cool. I think it's a really nice package and is definitely one of the better roll and write games that I have played ever. I think I like that it's whiteboards, not bits of paper. You can also introduce different Tetris shapes. So not only can you make, you can flip the board for an advanced version on this side, but this board has a more advanced version where you're not dictated what shapes, you can just play with any shape. So you can bring in really hard shapes or you can have a little mixture, and it just makes the game a little bit different every time you play. So if you really like roll and write games, then I think Tag City is definitely one to try out. It's not up there for me with like my absolute favorites because it doesn't have that push or luck and the punishing play, but not everyone likes that. That's just kind of my style. So if you prefer a style where it's more about working out the puzzle and trying to push for the most points, but also with this interesting interaction of watching what other people are doing, then absolutely check it out. That is Tag City. Those are the board games that I've been playing lately. I'll put links to where you can buy them in the description below. I'm Jon Purkis. Thanks for watching.